Good day, dear students. Today we continue our cycle of lecture of parasitology. We will talk about the helminths, and our theme of lecture today is nematodes. Nematodes. 1 minute. Okay. The nematodes, or roundworms, constitute the phylum Nematoda, also called Nemathelminthes. Nematodes are very small, slender worms, typically about 5 to 100 micrometers thick and 1.1 to 2.5 millimeters long. The smallest nematodes are microscopic, while free-living species can reach as much as 5 centimeters, and some parasitic species are larger still, reaching over 1 meter in length. The body is often ornamented with ridges, rings, bristlets, or other distinctive structures. The head of a nematode is relatively distinct, whereas the rest of the body is bilaterally symmetrical. The head is radially symmetrical with sensory bracelets and, in many cases, solid head shields radiating outwards around the mouth. The mouth has 8, 3 or 6 lips, which often bear a series of teeth on their inner edges. An adhesive caudal gland is often found at the tip of the tail. The epidermis is either a syncytium or a single layer of cells and is covered by a thick collagenous cuticle. The cuticle is often of a complex structure and may have 2 or 3 distinct layers. Underneath the epidermis lies a layer of longenital muscle cells. The relatively rigid cuticle works with the muscles to create a hydroskeleton, as nematodes lack circumferential muscles. Projections run from the inner surface of muscle cells toward the nerve cords. This is a unique arrangement in the animal kingdom, in which nerve cells normally extend fibers into the muscles rather than vice versa. Let's talk about digestive system of the nematodes. The oral cavity is lined with cuticle, which is often strengthened with structures such as ridges, especially with carnivorous species, which may bear a number of teeth. The mouth often includes a sharp stylet, which the animal can thrust in its prey. In some species, the stylet is hollow and can be used to suck liquids from plants or animals. The oral cavity opens into the muscular sucking pharynx, also linked with cuticle. Digestive glands are found in this region of the gut, producing enzymes that start to break down the food. In stylet-bearing species, this may even be injected into the prey. No stomach is present, with the pharynx connected directly to a muscleless intestine that forms the main length of the gut. This produces fusor enzymes and also absorbs nutrients through its single-cell thick lining. The last portion of the intestine is lined by cuticle, forming a rectum, which expels waste through the anus just below and in front of the tip of the tail. The movement of food through the digestive system is the result of the body movements of the worm. The intestine has valves or in other words, sphincters at either end to help control the movement of food through the body. Some words about the excretory system. Nitrogenous waste is excreted in the form of ammonia through the body wall and is not associated with any specific organs. However, the structures for excreting salt to maintain osmoregulation are typically more complex. In many marine nematodes, one or two unicellular renate glands excrete salt through a pore on the underside of the animal, close to the pharynx. In most other nematodes, these specialized cells have been replaced by an organ consisting of two parallel ducts connected by a single transverse duct. This transverse duct opens into a common canal that runs to the excretory pore. What about nervous system? Four peripheral nerves run along the length of the body on the dorsal, ventral, and lateral surfaces. Each nerve lies within a cord of connective tissue lying beneath the cuticle and between the muscle cells. The ventral nerve is the largest and has a double structure forward of the excretory pore. The dorsal nerve is responsible for motor control, while the lateral nerves are sensory and the ventral combines both functions. The nervous system is also the only place in nematode body that contains cilia, which are all non-motile and with a sensory function. At the anterior end of the animal, the nerves branch from a dense, circular nerve or nerve ring round surrounding the pharynx and serving as the brain. Smaller nerves run forward from the ring to supply the sensory organs of the head. The bodies of the nematodes are covered in numerous sensory bristlets and papillae that together provide a sense of touch. Behind the sensory bristlets on the head lie two small pits or amphids. These are well supplied with nerve cells and are probably chemoreception organs. A few aquatic nematodes possess what appear to be pigmented eye spots, but whether or not these are actually sensory in nature is unclear. Most nematode species are dioecious, with separate male and female individuals through some such as Cerhabitids elegans and Androdioecious consisting of hermaphrodites and rare males. Both sexes possess one or two tubular gonads. In the males, the sperm are produced at the end of the gonad and migrate along its length as they mature. The testis opens into a relatively wide seminal vesicle and then during intercourse into a glandular and muscular ejaculatory duct associated with the vas deferens and cloaca. In females, the ovaries each open into oviduct. In hermaphrodites, the eggs enter spermatocyte first, and their glandular uterus. The uteri both open into a common vulva or vagina, usually located in the middle of the morphologically ventral surfaces. Reproduction is usually sexual, though hermaphrodites are capable of self-fertilization. Males are usually smaller than females or hermaphrodites, often much smaller, and often have a characteristically bent or fan-shaped tail. During copulation, one or more chitinized spicules move out of the cloaca and are inserted into the genital pore of the female. Amoeboid sperm crawl along the spicule into the female worm. Nematode sperm is thought to be only eukaryotic cell without the global protein G-actin. Eggs may be embryonated or unembryonated when passed by the female, meaning the fertilized eggs may not yet be developed. A few species are known to be ovoviviparous. The eggs are protected by an outer shell secreted by the uterus. In free-living roundworms, the eggs hatch into larvae, which appear essentially identical to the adults, except for an undeveloped reproductive system. In parasitic roundworms, the life cycle is often much more complicated. Most nematodes are free-living forms found in soil and water. Several species are parasites of plants. Many nematodes parasites in invertebrate and vertebrate animals. Now let's talk about some members of this phylum. And first members is Ascaris lumbricoides. Ascaris lumbricoides is the large round worm of humans, growing to a length of up to 35 centimeters. It is one of several species of Ascaris. An ascarid nematode of the phylum Nematoda, it is the most common parasitic worm in humans. This organism is responsible for the disease ascariasis, a type of helminthiasis and one of the group of neglected tropical diseases. An estimated 1/6 of the human population is infected by Ascaris lumbricoides or another roundworm. Ascariasis is prevalent worldwide, especially in tropical and subtropical countries. And now let's talk about the life cycle of the Ascaris lumbricoides. A match showing life cycle inside and outside of the human body of one fairly well described helminth. Ascaris lumbricoides infects humans via the fecal-oral route. Eggs released by adult females are shed in feces. Unfertilized eggs are often absorbed in fecal samples but never become infective. Fertilized eggs embryonate and become infected after 18 days to several weeks in soil, depending on the environmental conditions, such as moist, warm, shaded soil. When an embryonated egg is ingested, the rhabditiform larva hatches, then penetrates the wall of the gastrointestinal tract and enters the bloodstream. From there, it is carried to the liver and heart and enters pulmonary circulation to break free in the alveoli, where it grows and molts. In 3 weeks, the larva passes from the respiratory system to be coughed up, swallowed, and thus reaches the small intestine, where it matures to an adult male or female worm. Fertilization can now occur, and the female produced as many as 200,000 eggs per day for 20 to 18 months. These fertilized eggs become infectious after 2 weeks in soil. They can persist in soil for 10 years or more. The eggs have a lipid layer which makes them resistant to the effects of acid and alkalis as well as other chemicals. This resilience helps to explain why this nematode is such a ubiquitous parasite. What about clinical picture of ascariasis? The main symptoms. Often no symptoms are presented with a minor Ascaris lumbricoides infection. The inevitable consequence being the once a year passage of such clearly visible worms on close inspection. In the case of a bad infectious symptoms commonly include bloody sputum, cough, fever, abdominal discomfort, intestinal ulcers, as well as a less commonly missed passing of the quite long worms. Ascariasis is the most common cause of Leffler syndrome worldwide. Accompanying pathological symptoms including pulmonary infiltration, eosinophilia, and the diagnostic symptom is acid from standard microscopy of stools, radiographic apopsychis. One study has observed increases in fertility in infected women in a similar vein to good diet and exercise, but with all of the pathological negatives and discomforts the disease carries with it, varying from the host to host and again with diet. Another members of this phylum, the phylum of nematodes, is Trichuris trichiura. The nematode Trichuris trichiura, also called the human whipworm. You can learn in the another synonyms of this worm, for example, Trichocephalus trichiurus or whipworm, how I said some earlier. Trichuris trichiura is a parasitic roundworm that causes trichuriasis when infect a human large intestine. It is commonly known as a whipworm, which refers to the shape of the worm. It looks like a whip with wider handles at the posterior end. Trichuris trichiura has a narrow anterior esophageal end and shorter and thicker posterior end. These pinkish white worms are threaded through the mucosa. They attach to the host through their slender anterior end and feed on tissue secretion instead of blood. Females are larger than males, approximately 35 to 50 millimeters long compared to 30 to 45 millimeters. The females have a blunt round posterior end compared to their male counterparts with a coiled posterior end. Their characteristic eggs are barrel-shaped and brown and have a bipolar protuberances. And now about life cycle of Trichuris trichiura. The unembryonated eggs are passed with the stool. In the soil, the eggs develop into a two-cell stage, an advanced cleavage stage, and then they embryonate. Eggs become infective in 15 to 30 days. After ingestion, soil-contaminated hands or food, the eggs hatch in the small intestine and release larvae that mature and establish themselves as adults in the colon. The adult worms live in the cecum and ascending colon. The adult worms are fixed in the location with the anterior portions threaded into the mucosa. The female begins to oviposit 60 to 70 days after infection. Female worms in the cecum shed between 3,000 to 20,000 eggs per day. The lifespan of the adults is about 1 year. Trichuris trichiura can cause a serious disease, Trichuris dysentery syndrome, with chronic dysentery, anemia, rectal prolapse, and poor growth. And now let's talk about Ankylostoma duodenale and Necator americanus. Ankylostoma duodenale is a species of the roundworm genus Ankylostoma. It is a parasitic nematode worm and commonly known as the old work hookworm. It lives in the small intestine of hosts such as humans, cats, and dogs, where it is it is able to mate and mature. Ankylostoma duodenale and Necator americanus are the two human hookworm species that are normally discussed together as the cause of hookworm infection. They are dioecious. Ankylostoma duodenale is abundant through the world, including Southern Europe, North Africa, India, China, Southeast Asia, some areas in the United States, the Caribbean, and South America. Ankylostoma duodenale is small, cylindrical worms, grayish-white in color. It has two ventral plates on the anterior margin of the buccal capsule. Each of them has two large teeth that are fused at their bases. A pair of small teeth can be found in the depths of the buccal capsule. Males are 8 to 11 mm long with a copulatory bursa at the posterior end. Females are 10 to 13 mm long with the vulva located at the posterior end. Females can lay 10,000 to 30,000 eggs per day. The average lifespan of Ankylostoma duodenale is 1 year. Necator americanus has two dorsal and two ventral cutting plates around the anterior margin of the buccal capsule. It also has a pair of subdorsal and a pair of subventral teeth located close to the rear. Males are usually 7 to 9 mm long, whereas the females are about 9 to 11 mm long. The typical lifespan of these parasites is 3 to 5 years. They can produce between 5,000 and 10,000 eggs per day. After a filariform infective larva penetrates the intact skin, most commonly through the feet, the larva enters the blood circulation. It is then carried to the lung, breaks into alveoli, ascends the bronchi and trachea, and is coughed up and swallowed back into the small intestine, where it matures. The larva later matures into an adult in the small intestine, where they attach to the villi, and female worms can lay 25,000 eggs per day. The eggs are released into the feces and reside on soil. When deposited on warm, moist soil, a larva rapidly develops into the egg and hatches after 1 to 2 days. This rhabditiform larva molts twice in the soil and becomes a skin-penetrating third-stage infected larva within 5 to 10 days. The infected rhabditiform larvae are able to sense vibrations in the soil, heat or carbon dioxide, and are able to use dendritic processes similar to cilia. They use these processes as thermosensory, chemosensory, and mechanosensory receptors to migrate towards a host for infection. The rhabditiform larva can then penetrate the exposed skin of another organism and begin a new cycle of infection. Ankylostoma duodenale is prevalent in Southern Europe, North Africa, India, China, Southeast Asia, small areas of United States, the Caribbean islands, and South America. This hookworm is well known in meadows because of the consistency in temperature and humidity that provides an ideal habitat for eggs and juvenile development. An estimated 1 billion people are infected with hookworms. Transmission of Ankylostoma duodenale is by contact of skin with the soil contaminated with larvae. The way it enters the human body was understood in the 1880 after an epidemic of ankylostomiasis among miners working in the hot and humid Gotthard Tunnel in the Switzerland. Some words about the clinical picture of ankylostomiasis. A light hookworm infection causes abdominal pain, loss of appetite, and geophagy. Heavy infection causes severe protein deficiency or iron deficiency anemia. Protein deficiency may lead to dry skin, edema, and abdominal distension from edema, portbelly, while iron deficiency anemia may result in mental dullness and heart failure. Women who are pregnant and infected should be aware that this parasite is able to infect the fetus and can cause complications such as low birth weight, maternal anemia, and infant mortality. The eggs of Ankylostoma duodenale and Necator americanus cannot be distinguished. Larvae cannot be found in stool specimens unless they are left at ambient temperature for a day or more. Education, improved sanitation, and controlled disposal of the human feces are important. Wearing shoes in endemic areas can reduce the prevalence of infection as well as. And our last members of phylum Nematodus today is Strongyloides stercoralis. Strongyloides stercoralis is a human pathogenic parasitic roundworm causing the disease strongyloidiasis. Strongyloides stercoralis infection is associated with the fecal contamination of soil or water. Hence, it is a very rare infection in developed economies. In developing countries, it is less prevalent in urban areas than in rural areas, where sanitation standards are poor. Strongyloides stercoralis can be found in the areas with tropical and subtropical climates. Whereas males grow to only about 0.9 mm in length, females can grow from 2 to 2.5 mm. Both sexes also possess a tiny buccal capsule and cylindrical esophagus without a posterior bulb. In the free-living stage, the esophagi of both sexes are rhabditiform. Males can be distinguished from males by two structures, the spicules and gubernaculum. The strongyloid's life cycle is heterogonic. It is more complex than that of most nematodes, with its alternation between free-living and parasitic cycles, and its potential for autoinfections and multiplication within the host. The parasitic cycle is homogonic while the free-living cycle is heterogonic. The heterogonic life cycle is advantageous to the parasite because it allows reproduction for one or more generations in the absence of a host. In the free-living cycle, the rhabditiform larvae passed into the stool can either molt twice and become infective filariaform larvae, or molt 4 times and become free-living adult males and females that mate and produce eggs from which rhabditiform larvae hatch. In the direct development, first-stage larvae transform into infective larvae via free molts. The indirect route results first in the development of free-living adults that mate. The females lay eggs which hatch and then develop into larvae. The direct route gives a larva faster 3 days versus in indirect route 7 to 10 days. However, the indirect route results in the increase in the number of larvae produced. Speed of development of larvae is traded for increased numbers. The free-living males and females of Stranguloides stercoralis die after one generation. They do not persist in the soil. The latter, in turn, can either develop into a new generation of free-living adults or develop into infective filiform larvae. The filiform larvae penetrate the human host skin to initiate the parasitic cycle. The infectious larva penetrates the skin when it contacts soil. While Stranguloides stercoralis is attracted to chemicals such as carbon dioxide or sodium chloride, these chemicals are not specific. Larvae have been thought to locate their host via chemicals in the skin, the predominant one being urocanic acid, a histidine metabolite of the uppermost layer of the skin that is removed by sweat or the daily skin shedding cycle. Urocanic acid concentration can be up to 5 times greater in the food than any other part of the human body. Some of them enter the superficial veins and are carried in the blood to the lungs, where they enter the alveoli. They are then coughed up and swallowed into the gut, where they parasitize the intestinal mucosa of the duodenum and jejunum. In the small intestine, they molt twice and become adult female worms. The female live throated in the epithelium of the small intestine and by parthenogenesis produced eggs, which yield rhabditiform larvae. Only females will reach reproductive adulthood in the intestine. Female Stranguloides reproduce through parthenogenesis. The eggs hatch in the intestine and young larvae are then excreted in the feces. It takes about 2 weeks to reach egg development from the initial skin penetration. By this process, Stranguloides stercoralis can cause both respiratory and gastrointestinal symptoms. The worms also participate in autoinfection, in which the rhabditiform larvae become infected filariaform larvae, which can penetrate either the intestinal mucosa, internal autoinfection, or the skin of the perianal area, external autoinfection. In either case, the filariaform larvae may follow the previously described route, being carried successively to the lungs, the bronchial tree, the pharynx, and the small intestine, where they mature into adults, or they may disseminate widely in the body. To date, occurrence of autoinfection in humans with helminthic infection is recognized only in Stranguloides stercoralis and Capillaria philippensis infection. In this case of Stranguloides, autoinfection may explain the possibility of persistent infection for many years in person not having been in an endemic area and of hyperinfections in immunodepressed individuals. Many people infected are asymptomatic at first. Symptoms include dermatitis, swelling, itching, larva occurrence, and mild hemorrhage at the site where the skin has been penetrated. Spontaneous scratch-like lesion may be seen on the face or elsewhere. In the parasite reaches the lungs, the chest may feel as if it is burning, and wheezing and coughing may result, along with pneumonia-like symptoms. It is called Lafleur syndrome. The intestines could eventually be invaded, letting the burning pain tissue damage, sepsis, and ulcers. Stool may have yellow mucus with a recognizable smell. Chronic diarrhea can be a symptom. In severe cases, edema may result in obstruction of the intestinal tract as well as loss of peristaltic contractions. Strangulitis in immunocompetent individuals is usually an indolent disease. However, in immunocompromised individuals, it can cause a hyperinfective syndrome, also called disseminated strangulitis, due to the reproductive capacity of the parasite inside the host. The hyperinfective syndrome can have a mortality rate close to 90% if disseminated. So, today our lecture is over. We will talk more about Nemathelminthes in our next lecture. We will be talking about another members of this phylum. Thank you for your attention, and we will see on the next week.